At just 20 years old, he became king. Before he was 33, he had forged the largest empire the world had ever seen. This is the incredible true story of Alexander the Great, history's youngest and perhaps greatest conqueror. Alexander was born in 356 BC in the kingdom of Macedon. His father was King Philip II, a military genius who revolutionized the Macedonian army. His mother was Queen Olympias, a fierce and ambitious woman who believed her son was destined for godhood. Legends claim Olympias told a young Alexander that his true father wasn't Philip, but Zeus, the king of the gods himself. Whether this was a clever political move or a deeply held belief, it didn't matter. Alexander grew up convinced he was meant for something far beyond mortal rule. To shape this divine destiny, his father hired the greatest mind of the age to be his tutor Aristotle. At just 13 years old, Alexander began his studies with the legendary philosopher. He learned about politics, science, philosophy, and the art of warfare. But more than just facts and figures, Aristotle taught him how to think, how to reason, and how to lead like a king. This education would prove to be as deadly a weapon as any sword. Alexander wasn't just a scholar, he was a warrior from a young age. By his teenage years, he was already being tested in the crucible of battle. At 16, while his father was away on campaign, Alexander was left to rule Macedon, his region, where he swiftly crushed a rebellion. At 18, he commanded the cavalry at the decisive Battle of Chaeronea, fighting alongside his father to secure Macedonian dominance over Greece. He was proving to be his father's son in every way. Then, in 336 BC, tragedy struck. King Philip II was assassinated by one of his own bodyguards. Suddenly, at just 20 years old, Alexander was thrust onto the throne. Many of the powerful Greek city-states and rival nobles saw a boy king and sensed weakness. They thought his reign would be short and chaotic. They were disastrously wrong. Before he could dream of conquering the world, Alexander first had to secure his own kingdom. Rebellions flared up across Greece, testing the young king's resolve. The powerful city of Thebes openly defied him, believing he lacked his father's strength. Alexander's response was swift and utterly ruthless. He marched his army to Thebes and, after a short siege, burned the city to the ground, selling its population into slavery. He sent a terrifying and crystal-clear message to the rest of Greece: oppose me, and you will simply cease to exist. The Greek world fell silent. With his home base now secure, Alexander turned his attention to his father's greatest unfinished ambition, the conquest of the mighty Persian Empire. The Persian Empire was the superpower of its day, stretching from Egypt to India. It was vast, wealthy, and commanded seemingly endless armies. Alexander crossed into Asia with a relatively small force of around 40,000 soldiers. The odds were stacked impossibly against him, but Alexander's tactical brilliance, combined with the discipline of his Macedonian phalanx, proved unstoppable. He won a stunning victory against the Persian regional governors in Asia Minor. Then, he faced the Persian king, Darius III himself, at the Battle of Issus. Despite being heavily outnumbered, Alexander led a decisive cavalry charge straight at Darius, forcing the Persian king to flee in panic. The final, epic showdown came at the Battle of Gaugamela. Once again, Darius assembled a massive army, determined to crush the young Macedonian invader. But Alexander's strategic genius was on full display. He outmaneuvered and shattered the Persian forces in one of the most famous battles in all of history. After Gaugamela, the heart of the Persian Empire lay open. Alexander marched triumphantly into the legendary cities of Babylon, Susa, and the grand capital, Persepolis. The most powerful empire on earth had fallen to a king who was still in his 20s. From Persia, Alexander marched south into Egypt. Instead of resistance, he was welcomed as a liberator from Persian rule. The Egyptians crowned him pharaoh and declared him a living god, a son of Amun-Ra, which conveniently aligned with his own belief in his divine heritage from Zeus. It was here, on the coast of the Mediterranean, that he founded the city that would bear his name forever, Alexandria. It would become one of the greatest centers of learning, culture, and science in the ancient world. Alexander no longer saw himself as just a king. He was now divine. But his ambition knew no bounds. He pushed his army ever eastward, into the uncharted territories of Central Asia, and then into the Indian subcontinent. This was a campaign unlike any other. His army faced brutal deserts, freezing mountains, and grueling guerrilla warfare. They fought against enemies they had never encountered, including the terrifying war-elephants of the Indian king Porus. Although Alexander was again victorious, the years of constant marching and fighting were taking their toll. His army was exhausted, Finally, at the banks of the Hyphasis River in India, his loyal and weary soldiers had had enough. They mutinied, refusing to march one step further into the unknown. For the first time in his life, the man who had conquered the world was forced to turn back. Alexander wasn't just a conqueror, he was a visionary. He didn't want to simply rule over subjugated peoples. He dreamed of a unified world, a fusion of Greek and Eastern cultures. He encouraged his soldiers to marry Persian women, and he himself took Persian wives. He adopted elements of Persian dress and court customs, and he integrated conquered soldiers into his own army. He founded dozens of new cities, spreading Greek language and ideas across his vast empire. This vision of a multicultural, interconnected world was centuries ahead of its time. In 323 BC, back in the city of Babylon, Alexander was planning his next campaign, a conquest of Arabia, but he suddenly fell violently ill. Racked by fever and pain, the strongest man in the world grew weaker by the day. After several days of agony, Alexander the Great died. He was only 32 years old. The cause of his death remains one of history's greatest mysteries. Was it poison from a rival, a sudden disease like malaria or typhoid, or was it simply fate catching up to a man who had lived such an intense life? On his deathbed, when his generals asked him to whom he left his vast empire, he is said to have whispered his final, fateful words to the strongest. Without his singular leadership, Alexander's empire immediately fractured. His powerful generals, the Diadochi, tore it apart, fighting each other for decades in a bloody struggle for power. The unified world he had dreamed of died with him, but his legacy is eternal. Alexander the Great never lost a major battle. He was a military genius who redrew the map of the ancient world. His conquest sparked the Hellenistic Age, a period where Greek culture spread and blended with the cultures of the East, changing art, science, and philosophy forever. His empire may have crumbled, but his legend as a brilliant leader, a fearless warrior, and an unmatched conqueror will never fade. If this story of epic conquest and ambition inspired you, please show some support by hitting that like button. Make sure you subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss our next deep dive into history. And let me know in the comments who you think we should cover next. Thanks for watching.